What's the scariest true story you've heard or told? I met a guy who had been traveling Australia with a couple friends, hitchhiking around as many of us had done. One of his friend told him they were near his distant uncle's house, whom he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member, and as they had hoped, the uncle offered them a place to stay. He picked them up in town and drove them out to his rural property way out in the bush. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to set up a place to sleep, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of sleeping bags and bed rolls. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kit and set up on the living room floor. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened, and afterwards the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later, that man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhiking backpackers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me this story was 100% certain he had slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims. There have been several confirmed cases in a few different countries of people living in other people's houses unbeknownst to them. I believe one case went on for a couple of years. The intruder would wait until the homeowner would go to work and then sneak out and steal small amounts of food as not to be noticed. Well, eventually the homeowner did notice and couldn't figure out where his food was going, so he set up a hidden camera to record it. I can only imagine how scary it would have been to come home from work one night and sit down to watch the video, skipping through hours of stillness, to suddenly come across a person crawling out of your attic. And then the slow realization that that person is still in your house at that moment. And then the retroactive fear of thinking back to all the times you laid awake at night and heard a noise, which you just dismissed as coming from the pipes or the old wooden beams, but actually it was a fucking person just above you. It gives me the heebie-jeebies every time I think about it. The Lake Bodom murders are scary as hell. There are 4 teens who go on a camping trip in Finland. The next morning, 3 of the teens are found murdered, and one of them is almost dead and severely injured, but survived. No one knows who the murderers are today. Almost a decade later, the 4th teen who survived was accused of murdering them and gets sent to prison. But then he was released a year later, because there was no DNA evidence. And no good evidence to prove that he murdered them at all. When I was about 8 years old, our school was doing swimming lessons as part of the curriculum. My mom worked late, so we went to after-school care and didn't get home until after dark. When we got home, Mom asked me to take my wet togs, bathing suit, and towel out to the clothesline to dry so I could use them the next day. I was so confident going outside to do this and had this real feeling of being a big kid. I walked into our backyard only for a man to be running at me. I screamed, jumped inside and instinctively locked the back door as I did so. As this was happening, my mum told me she heard the guy jump the gate which was next to her bedroom just after she heard me scream and came running to find me. I slept with the light on until I was 16 and I get my husband to go outside for me while it's dark. My baby's crib caught fire in the middle of the night. Some people's literal worst nightmare. Edit. My baby was in it and he was severely burnt and spent a month intubated and in a medically induced coma. He is 5 now and is okay though. The fire was a freak accident. His humidifier caught fire, smoldered for a little while and drained the oxygen in the room before the smoke alarm went off. When we opened the door to his room, it flooded with oxygen, creating a backdraft and launched a fireball at his crib. This was his crib the next day. https://imager.com/a/2javdu closing square bracket opening parenthesis https://imager.com/a/2javdu closing parenthesis. My mother never taught me to swim because when she was a teenager she saw a friend get sucked into a whirlpool at the bottom of a drainage lake that is the deepest body of water within a few hundred miles of us. They didn't find his body for days. My dad knew a war vet who served in the Middle East, and one day he is at a bar and a drunk dude accused him of flirting with his wife and proceeded to start throwing punches. The vet returns the hits and then pulls a knife and slashes the man and gets behind him and nearly completely decapitates him right there in front of everybody. He picks up his stuff and leaves go home, and when the police arrive some time later they find him with a bucket of KFC eating at his kitchen table. He got off with self-defense. My mom's best friend was murdered by a man because she broke up with him. One of my dad's friend's wife was murdered by some crazy dude walking down the street. This guy had just been released from a mental hospital and literally just stabbed her as she walked home. When my dad's friend came back, he thought she had just taken the dogs out for a walk, so he walked along the normal walk route and he saw loads of blue lights. He was stopped by a police officer and wasn't allowed any closer until he saw that it was his wife. I had an associate that was a fireman. He had to go find the head of his brother-in-law after a car accident. Then he had to console his sister when she heard. Tough bloke. Can you imagine that being your day? My best friend and someone I've known since I was in kindergarten was at Santa Barbara during the shooting. His friend and roommate was gunned down in front of him. I'm not sure how he survived. I remember the feeling of horror when I stumbled upon the live thread that morning. Just this feeling of being useless. You know something has happened and your best friend is in danger and there's nothing you can do because he's so far away. I'm so glad he survived, but it still must haunt him. When he came back home afterward, he immediately came to my place and asked my family if he learned to use our pistol and rifle. Only family around he know that had firearms. I don't. Maybe it was a coping thing. Apparently he goes hunting now. Bachelor's in microbiology and he goes hunting, takes all sorts. I'm proud of him though. Only guy, the first no from my hometown to make it through college. I was in class in 10th grade and the teacher was asking everyone how their weekend was. The quietest girl in the class spoke and while breaking down in tears said she was on a trip in the mountains with her mom. They made a stop for some reason and she looked over the cliff and saw an overturned vehicle with a dead family scattered about. Most of what happened to those who died at Chernobyl qualify, but that's a familiar one. A more obscure source of horror is that the drugs that stop you from moving during surgery and the ones that stop you from feeling pain are often separate chemicals. There have been cases where the sedatives wore off during surgery, but the chemicals paralyzing the body were still active, so they were fully conscious while being operated on, but unable to move or show that they were in pain. Sweet dreams. Lived W3 other girls sophomore year of college. All three took off early for spring break, leaving me alone in the house. First night alone, I heard someone bang on my front door at 2 a.m. Then I hear more knocks at the back door. A man yells, "Boulder police, open the door." When I didn't, I heard body slams against both doors. Soon I hear, "Little girl, open the door, we know you're alone." At this point I'm so scared I keep accidentally dialing 611 instead of 911. When I eventually do get the police, cars roll up, thankfully, just minutes later. Officers have 4 boys from our school hockey team face down on the grass. I had to file restraining orders against them and the kicker, one lived across the street from me and we'd never spoken a single word before then. There was a man who got out of his car after it broke down on the highway and attempted to walk across the highway to the other side late at night. He was hit by a car and his body was driven over so many times that by the time the sun came up his body parts were scattered across 300 meters of highway. I was in the drunk tank with a guy who beat another man to death. The guy didn't die immediately, was in intensive care for 3 days, then died in the hospital. The man who killed him told me specific details about it, and on the 3rd day, when the guy in IC died, the COs came in the cell and put him in isolation across the hall. They left him in general pop until the guy actually died, and once he was officially charged with capital murder then they took him out of our cell. I was 17 at the time. Never forget being scared to fall asleep right next to this dude. My friends and I were drinking one night and going around asking, "Hey, whatever happened to underscore 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 underscore?" In this case, a guy a few of us used to have an aid period within high school. Nice kid. Googled him. I've found a few sad results playing this game in the past, and there were a couple appellate court decisions visible in first few results. Turns out he went to Afghanistan, got extremely fucked up in combat, court notes said he saw things there that completely undid him, basically, and came home with PTSD and delusional schizophrenia. Once home, he apparently has been on a mission to kill his mother to save her from demons and send her to heaven. He's tried and failed numerous times, apparently. It's not just that A greater than B plot though. It's all the surround. We looked up his social media accounts then and it's just threads and threads of manic rambling about demons. It was sad to find this, and not the only time I've found a former classmate lost her mind, unfortunately. But also terrifying to think you could be normal, then through one set of circumstances or another, become completely insane within a few years. This happened to a girl I know. She came back home with her Tinder date. They were both drunk and high, a little. She went in to change, and when she came back to her bedroom, her date bent down to remove his shoes. As he got back up, he violently dragged her, against her will. She struggled and he covered her mouth. Took her all the way outside of her place, out of her apartment complex, with a strong hold. Then finally he let her go and she asked him what the fuck was wrong with him. He told her that a man was hiding under her bed. When I was young, I saw a documentary about a guy who got flesh-eating bacteria in his nasal cavity. It ate his face and he's still alive. Eventually they removed the bacteria by removing the eaten parts of his face. He got a prosthetic face, which back in those days was basically a plastic Halloween mask that tried to look human. At the end of the documentary, he took the mask off. His face from his forehead down to his mouth was just a hole. I was robbed at gunpoint in front of my house. He had the gun pressed into the back of my head. He took my money and jewelry and took off. He was arrested an hour later. I think the whole 9/11 incident, being above the impacted floors, and seeing those people at the broken windows, looking out, all strangely calm, I'd be waving a white cloth and freaking out. To me, that was absolutely scary as it unfolded live on TV. A Catholic priest under investigation for questionable communications with a minor and misuse of church funds killed himself by jumping from an 82-story building. Imagine falling to the ground from such a height, taking all that guilt with you. One I've seen, shitty teenagers threw a rock into traffic. Smashes the windshield of a nice car. Driver loses control and kills a pedestrian while skidding on ice. The My Lai massacre. U.S. soldiers killed and raped more than 500 Vietnamese women and children. https://en.m.wiki.org/wiki/m%e1%bb%b9_lie_massacre https://en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/William_Cali one guy got house arrest. https://www.stripes.com/news/special-reports/1968-stories/my-lie-1.51694. I have 2 to 1. A friend of mine went backpacking in Australia and she wanted to work on a farm. Placed an ad on a website. Got reaction from a farmer. They met somewhere and he'd pick her up and take her to the farm. At the farm, this dude chained my friend, raped her multiple times and left her still chained. She thinks he was planning on murdering her. Luckily she had her backpack still with her and the dude wasn't very good in chaining her, so she escaped from the chains, took her laptop, sent Facebook messages to people she met in Australia that she was captured, etc. She chained herself back up, but she knew one of her friends called the police. Police found her. She's safe but fucking traumatized, of course. 2. Another friend of mine had a really bad traffic accident. He was riding his bike in the bike lane, next to a big truck. He was in the blind spot of the truck, fell under the truck, was dragged 600 meters down with the truck, his face scraped on the asphalt, lost his eye, lost a lot of skin from his arms, so much one needed to be amputated and the other only the fingers were amputated, but what makes it extra scary is just that he was fully conscious the whole time. Like having your face being scraped away on the asphalt fully conscious. He made it though. He lost an eye, an arm and some fingers, but mentally he is okay. It's a miracle. One of my friends was drugged by a nice-seeming girl at a bar that tried to sex traffic her. The girl got her an Uber to an address she didn't know under the guise of, "Get my drunk friend home," but she woke up on the way and told the driver she didn't know where they were going. They called the cops. Apparently that wasn't the first time that week they'd heard the same story and they recognized the address as one they were already tracking. If she hadn't woken up on the way she might have been trafficked by now. Apparently they use younger, safe-seeming girls to do the collecting a lot of the time. The Reina Marroquin story, https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/murder_of_reina_Maroc%c3% add-in closing parenthesis. A young lady had an affair with her boss in the 1960s, got pregnant. After threatening to tell her boss's wife, she was killed by her boss, who then put her body in an industrial barrel. He hid the barrel in his house for years and none of the various owners opened it due to the weight. Finally, one guy decided to dispose of it in the 90s, and when he opened it he saw it contained something. An investigation traced the barrel and girl back to the man, who then killed himself before police could come arrest him after confirming he was the father of the unborn baby via DNA. The lady's mother was in her late 80s when she was told her missing daughter was finally found. She claims that she had been having dreams about her daughter being inside a metal container for years after she had gone missing. I don't know if this will seem that scary to y'all, but one time when I was about 16 I was at a laundromat with a friend in her neighborhood. I wasn't as familiar with the neighborhood, I was just there to hang out with her. We start walking inside and there's this man standing outside his car, seemingly looking for something. He was a bit older. My friend walked right past them without giving them a single glance, but he caught me looking and asked, "Will you come help me find my phone? I dropped it down here somewhere and I can't find it." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I looked into the car and noticed a second man in the car staring dead at me. I'll never forget the way he looked at me. I immediately snapped my head away and followed my friend inside. When we got inside, she told me that those men were known traffickers and that was one of their ploys. I was shaken up because if I had been a little younger and a little dumber, I don't know if I would have seen the second man in the car. I think I might have helped the old man. Back in the 70s, some friends and I planned a camping trip to northern Cali for a long weekend. We packed up and headed north on the highway. Somewhere around Bakersfield we picked up a hitchhiker headed to Kernville, who we dropped off before heading further north. So we get to our campsite and start getting things set up. My GF finds a note tucked into the top of her backpack. It read, "I could have killed all of you. None of us slept that night." I am not sure I remember all the details correctly, but anyway. A guy was cleaning a giant cooking tank at a tuna factory. It was so big that he had to climb all the way in. Someone else didn't check and protocol was broken along the way somewhere. Second guy locked the barrel and turned it on, cooking the guy inside alive. Co-worker's dad was babysitting his baby boy for him. At one point, Granddad went into the nursery to check on the baby and found that he'd somehow reached for the window blind strap and tangled himself up in it to the point where he was choking. Baby was already blue and all of the veins in his face had popped. Grandpa called 911 and frantically dialed 911. EMS was there in 2 to 3 minutes and they brought the little fellow back to life and he's okay now. Thanks for watching. See you later.